when I was in high school, I had some very troubled sports years. There were days when Ferndale High School was like leading it was amazing, and everybody, when I say Ferndale High School, they're like, "Oh, that guy!" Like, "No, that wasn't my time exactly." And they certainly aren't looking to me in my sports career as any example. My children mock me, especially the more sporty ones, about my high school years of basketball. They were exilic years. They were years where we were not in the promised land. We were in exile. We had so many coaches. I had 4 coaches in 4 years in high school, and we were poor in a lot of ways. We didn't make it happen. We couldn't do much. I do remember one time tearfully yelling after a game which we had won by 1 point in double overtime. It was our only win that year, and it was a non-league game. And see, we're not losers. We won one. But I think throughout high school, I was always under this pressure, like you're not home yet. You're not home yet. You're not home yet. And I remember even when I got to college and got a chance to play a little bit of basketball for a few years and had some success there. But there were days where you'd come after a game to practice, and you just knew you didn't want to show up to practice that day. But there really was no option. Although my kids tell me that after a bad day of a bad game and all this kind of stuff, sometimes kids just don't even show up to practice, and somehow they don't have to run lines. But there I was on the third from the right there. But after about 20 turnovers in a basketball game, the coach starts to get a little frustrated. And so then you run a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot. And there's a sense of how do I please the coach enough so that we could stop running lines, right? And I would be the guy at the front of the line, and this tells you way too much about my personality, but I'm just in a self-revelatory mood. So, I'm like, come on, guys, push it, let's go. Just trying to impress the coach with our super enthusiasm for earning this punishment and working it out and doing all this kind of stuff, just hoping that the coach's tension would calm and that he would see we're hard workers and we'll never do that again, coach. And such is sports sometimes. How many of you have had similar sporting experiences where you got this coach that's he's hard on you, and you got to do whatever you can to keep this uneasy peace, even though you're in exile, this uneasy peace from getting any worse, and just kind of deal with that. When we're looking at a scene here in the scriptures where the Jewish leaders were trying to keep these people in lines so as not to offend God any more than already happened. They were still in exile. But weren't they in the promised land, Aaron? I mean, they were back in Israel, right? Yeah, but they had a perspective that it wasn't quite glorious yet. Remember Roman rule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were not in the promised land. They were not under God's great favor. They in fact were doing everything possible to try to purify themselves and impress God and try to shape culture in such a way that God would look down on them and say, okay, now I'm going to free you from your bondage, and now I'm going to make you on top of the heap, and Rome will go away, and all these things will happen. Everything's going to be great. Remember John the Baptist? What was he doing? He was starting a renewal movement. Baptize yourselves, purify yourselves, get ready, make way for God. Everybody just straighten up. Mom's coming home and the house is a mess, kind of style of mode, right? So let's go, everybody. And I'm not just talking about husbands who say that. I'm even talking about kids who might say that. No. So it's time to just get everything just so, because we don't want to make God angry, which is an interesting disposition, right, of their thought of what God is like and what his heart toward them is. And so we have a mode here where we'll see that the Pharisees, the religious leaders in Israel's day are protecting this thing called Sabbath. And they're protecting it so much that they've placed layers and layers and layers and layers around it so as not to offend God, because, well, it's a good thing, not offending God. but then they've added all these religious rituals and layers to it. So we're going to see this in the reading of the Scripture. I hope you'll just kind of walk through this with me. If you've got a Bible, go ahead and open it to John chapter 5. And if you allow me, I'll just read it to you. After this last scene where there was a healing, it was time, and Jesus went to a feast of the Jews in Jerusalem. And now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. And one man who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water's stirred up, and while I'm going down, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who'd been healed, "It's the Sabbath, and it's not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who is this man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who'd been healed didn't know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you're well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So that's the text we have today, which, if you were keeping track, is like a labyrinth. Like so many little things. Like, well, hey, I don't know that I like that. That doesn't, I don't think that's good. That doesn't seem right. There's lots of questions here. There's lots of questions. At the end, we see just this picture that Jesus is God's equal, and this picture that's forming about this. And so here we have a very interesting thing. Now let's just go through it a little bit, because maybe we'll stumble upon the things that you've stumbled upon as well, just in that reading. This is a good one, a good time to learn how to read footnotes. How many of you have an understanding of what footnotes are? Yeah, there's a little number, you drop to the bottom, and they tell quite a story. For instance, if you were to turn right now to John chapter 5, verse 4, and read it to me, you'd have to find it in your footnotes, because this passage actually skips from verse 3 to verse 5. Inquiring minds want to know. Some of you don't, but anyway, this is tough. So read your footnotes, read slow, read your footnotes, and you'll see that verse 4 is something the scholars call a marginal gloss. Not a matte, not super glossy. No, it's just a marginal. I was actually decided not to work hard on a graphic for that one, just so you know. You should be thankful for that. A marginal gloss means that when they were writing, a scribe wrote in the margins the tradition that had been carried on to that day, that it was, in fact, a angel who stirred up the waters in that pool. And that's why people who were sick tried to get in it. When the angel stirred the water, that's why they got into it. And that there was some healing that took place. And that it became popular for such a thing. Although that's not found in the earliest and best manuscripts, and so they've just said, that slipped in there, and we're just letting you know about it, but we're slipping it out. It's kind of the way that's going. Earliest and best manuscripts realized that, we actually kind of found the place in time where that scribal writing in the margin got inserted in the text. But they're nice enough to tell you about it, so you don't have to be too stressed about it. So that's going on. That's interesting. There's this pool that is a very sacred place for a lot of people. After the fact, it became a sacred Roman pool, and they dedicated it to a god, Asclepius. And it was because it was this healing pool. There were healing waters. It was mineral springs likely coming up into it. And so when the spring kind of fed the pool, it caused water to move, and so they associated that with angelic activity and so forth. Basically, if you understand Jerusalem and you understand the Middle East, it doesn't rain much from like May to October. So all throughout the city are all sorts of pools or cisterns, areas where water is kept. This one was fed by a natural spring, which made it all the better. So that's kind of what's going on. We have an interesting, we call it superstition, or we say an interesting folk tradition that this is what happens there. And everybody's there. It seems everybody's there. What did you notice when Jesus asked this man if he wanted to be healed? Did he say, ooh, choose me? Did this man just erupt in faith at the presence of the Messiah, who is the healer, who is the unique Son of God? He makes an excuse. That's interesting. So Jesus won't heal you if you're busy making excuses. Is that the principle? I don't know. It seems to go on its head, the normal thing that we think. If you have enough faith, then God will heal you, right? Isn't that what we hear a lot? If you just have enough faith, God will heal you. Here is zero faith. Actual just excuses. And we see Jesus deciding to heal a guy. Well, put that one in your brain and think about that. It seems like Jesus is healing for different purposes than we would normally think of. He's not doing it as a trick, and he's not doing it for show. He, in fact, retreats into the crowds that he's lost. He's not just doing it for proof. And he's not doing it in response to this guy's faith. Why is he doing it? I'll take an answer if you think. Why does Jesus healing this guy? Out of love? Yeah. He's doing his Father's will. He's bringing up a point of conflict with the people that are around. It's not lost on Jesus that it's the Sabbath. I'd like to have this conversation. What's the best way to have the conversation about the Sabbath? Is to do one of these things on the Sabbath. You see that fully in the thing. But yeah, he does things when God tells him to do it. I have food you know nothing about. That's just to do the will of my Father. So sometimes I go, sometimes I stay. It's just I'm responsive to what God's saying. He's cued in to the control room there. Jesus seems more concerned about the one who gets the cure than the one who gets the credit. His heart toward you, his disposition towards you is healing and restorative. That's interesting to me. He says later, get up, take your bed, and walk. And so he does. And then when he meets this guy again, he says, you're well. Somehow the paralyzed state, I mean, think about all that would have to happen for a person to get up and walk after 38 years of atrophy and paralysis. Talking bone growth and sinews and muscles and energy and nerve receptors. And you're like, whoa, you're well. Awesome. Go and don't sin again so that nothing worse can happen to you. Oh, any of you catch on that one? That kind of catch like a, that's not what sickness isn't because of sin, and sin isn't because of sickness, and we have this interesting first century perspective. Oops, sorry. I think I want this one. First century perspective that sin and sickness are related. Just like blessing and curses are related. If you are in the land, then you do right by God, you keep him as your king, and all will go well with you. Do you ever remember any of those statements? You won't have any of the diseases that they have. You won't have sickness. You won't have plagues. You won't have drought. You will have all this abundance. And if you're unfaithful, then you will be driven out of the land, and the land won't work for you, and you'll be gone. This is the mode that they're in. I don't know that we can chastise them for thinking this way, but this is definitely something that was going on in the world. That was the perspective, that this is related to that, this is related to that. Now, we know we have a few instances that we could draw from. If you can open up your biblical memory, you can remember all the way back to Moses and his sister, whose name was Miriam. And Miriam was part of a rebellion, like a little protest against Moses. And God gave her instantly a disease because of her rebellion. And she then was cured when she came to Moses, and God forgave her, and her leprosy was instantly cleared up. We see a 1-to-1 correlation with you've sinned, you have this going on. We see a New Testament perspective. Jesus heals a guy, and the disciples ask, who sinned that this person was born blind? Was it something he did in utero or something like that? Did he kick too hard or something like that? He's just a bad baby. Or is it something his parents did? And Jesus says, neither. It was done so that my glory may be revealed. So we're like, okay, come on, Aaron, clean this up. Tell us what the truth is. And then you've got something in the middle where when David, Psalm 51, if you look, David has sinned grievously. And it's in his soul so deeply. And if he had left that unconfessed, it would have just eaten him alive. His bones were wasting away within him. That his sin and his inward turn on himself and his own selfishness has caused this production of anxiety and all sorts of just internal sickness. We know about that too, right? There's a lot that goes on in our soul that makes us sick too. And here we just have Jesus threading the needle, maybe through all of this. But I think probably one of the most important things to understand is that for John, in the Gospel of John, he is doing this either or motif, light or dark, belief, unbelief, right? And everything he sets up a story, and then how are people going to respond? Are they going to believe or are they going to not believe? And so for John, the primary sin that he keeps talking about is not, this person, she was a little on the outside, she was this, she was that. He's mainly talking about your response to Jesus. What will you do with the claims of Jesus? When he says, this is who I am, what are you going to do about that? And so I think we can land pretty squarely on this guy doesn't know who Jesus is. He finds out who Jesus is. He'd better believe who Jesus is. Or something worse is going to happen than just 38 years of paralysis. Your soul is in jeopardy if you don't believe in Jesus. I think that's where we land. Not to say there isn't this interesting tension between and within the scriptures about, I don't know. Something seems wrong with me. I wonder if it's because of something I've done. And the cure is, what is God's heart towards you? What is his disposition towards you? Is he out to get you? Because those of you who have that mindset are going to look at the most recent cold you have and go, it's probably because of something I did wrong. And some of you aren't disposed that way. And you say, I don't know. I remember way back when I got a sprained ankle, and I told my older brother, I was so Christian at that point. I was so amazingly Christian. And I was thinking about all these connections, and I'm just like, why would this be allowed? Why would I get a sprained ankle? And my brother, who's a little older and wiser, started to tell me about how when you twist an ankle a certain way, certain processes take place. He just describes a sprain to me. He's like, you're maybe overly mystifying that one. Why does this happen? Why is this? And it's like, well, that's just sometimes what happens. And life is hard, and we know that. Our world is corrupt and dark, and they don't want to let Jesus in. And so we persist in unbelief, and we persist under the curse and under the chaos that comes with that. And so it's a very predictable turn in a lot of ways. So that's where they're at, the religious leaders. Some of us are there too. What are you going to do with Jesus? You going to believe or not? There's a lot to believe about Jesus as he's continually presented, but remember the main passage, the key to John is the purpose statement. These things have been written that you may believe. Believe. Have trust in Jesus. And so we need to just think about, what is God's heart towards you? Retribution or justice? I think that the religious leaders were just waiting to get smacked by God or trying to earn his favor so slavenly through performance that they were paralyzed themselves over, how do I interact with God? And so they retreated to rules to avoid retribution instead of a relationship of restoration. Okay, so sometimes we can do that in our own spiritual lives. I'm just going to follow the rules to avoid the hard edge of God's justice and his wrath, rules to avoid the retribution, as opposed to a relationship that is leaning toward restoration. And what's worse is when we put that on other people. And we start to think, if you don't follow the rules, we're all messed up. And what the religious rulers were doing, were ruling and putting rules and boundaries around the Sabbath to a point where it was stifling people. To where even they would have to say, I'm worried that you, who just got healed after 38 years of paralysis, are breaking the rules and we're going to fall out of favor with God because of you. Wait, I've just been experiencing God's favor in this, and now you're telling me that's not it. There's an interesting tension here that we've got to figure out. So I just want to ask you, as we go through this, we're going to start to look at Sabbath, but do the rules seem safer than the relationship with God? Do the rules, okay, just do this, don't do that, do that. What else don't I do? What else do I do? Okay, good. I'll just do that list. Is that safer than a relationship with God for you? Because if the rules and avoiding retribution are safer for you, then you're not enjoying God. You're not satisfied in God. You're not enjoying his pleasure. You're just glad to avoid his displeasure. And while you may believe in a future salvation and a coming hope and all this will end and everything will be great, we call it heaven, or that the mode of the final salvation. While you might believe in that, you certainly wouldn't want to invite anybody into this world of rules just to avoid retribution. It's not a very inviting sort of space, is it? But if you truly believe that God is letting you enter into a relationship, a restorative relationship for you and other people, that changes your outlook toward the world. And you wouldn't really want this for anybody else either. You'd want restoration and joy. And so we need to think about how we're processing our faith so that we know what we're offering to other people as well. And I don't know your heart, I'm not presuming, but I know that the tendency is to go back to rules and safety as opposed to going toward relationship and this sense of unknown. And so let's press into the unknown. So the Sabbath was this idea that we see in Exodus. You recall it's part of the 10 Commandments. It's actually number 4. It's pretty high on the list. Of all the ones that we avoid, that's a pretty high one on the list. I mean, don't bear false witness is in there. Don't murder, covetousness, idolatry, and Sabbath. How many of you could just be honest and say, you've mostly ignored that one? I have. I mean, just mostly ignored that idea of Sabbath. I've used all sorts of mental gymnastics, even theological gymnastics, to try to avoid what's at the heart of this, which is rest in God and rest with God. This heart that's non-anxious, this heart that is satisfied, this heart that believes that God knows what he's doing and that it's all good. There's something really good at the heart of Sabbath. But then what happened was we don't trust people with that, and so we're going to start to build rules around that. Now, the main story of Sabbath comes out of the Exodus, as I mentioned. It's the Ten Commandments. And in that, it's listed, the reason is, the rationale for Sabbath is because God worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. That's the way you should do it too. So there's a pattern to follow. In Deuteronomy, it says, the reason you should do this is, it says, for God did this thing. He rescued you out of slavery. So keep the Sabbath. Well, that's kind of a different reason, but it's beautiful. Think about this. When you're in slavery, you work when? All the time, whenever, and then more, right? And you're always working. You're slaving away. You're doing that thing. And he says, you've been liberated. Don't slave away. You're not a slave. You're free. So take a day off. And on that day off, remind yourself of how free you are. And who's going to run the world when you're not working? Who's going to do it? I mean, obviously you run the world during those other days. But who's going to run the world while you're not working? Well, it's Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth, the one who can liberate you from slavery. That's a hugely important thing. Now, the religious leaders over time had gone from the few spots you see throughout Scripture. Well, you call this a Sabbath. I call this a Sabbath. Isaiah 58, for instance. Great passage. You call that Sabbath? No. This is what I call a Sabbath. Keeping my day holy looks like this. Love justice and do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. This is what I require of you, right? But they started building little frames around the Sabbath to keep people from getting too close and touching it and offending God. They came up with, literally in the writings, it's 40 minus 1, because 40 would be too complete, so they just backed off one, of things that you cannot do on the Sabbath. And they are very, very much something you wouldn't have bothered to do. It's like you don't prepare the antelope you've just slain for a meal. Like, deal. All right. So give me, 39 minus 1. Okay, don't thresh your grain. All right, I got this. All right. So anyway, it's all very agrarian, very much like, don't do this, don't do that, don't prep your wheat, don't do these different things. But they created 39 rules to try to do that. One of the rules was don't take something from one place to another. Okay. But what's the point of Sabbath? It's to have the sense of God is on the throne. I'm not a slave anymore. I can work along in partnership with God, but I can also take a break, and the fields are going to grow their wheat. And the world is going to rotate one more time. And the sun's going to go down, and the sun's going to come up. And I could just take a breather and rest and be satisfied in God. Do we need this today? Do you think in our culture we need not necessarily the day, which we need a day, but rest in God? It seems to be the one thing that's so broken in me, probably in you, certainly in our culture, is that busyness is next to godliness. And the more productive I feel, even if I'm just spinning my wheels, at least I look busy. I don't remember which movie it was, and if you remember, don't tell me because I don't want to know, I guess, because it's probably a bad movie. But I remember one movie where someone had a prophetic sign, look busy, Jesus is coming. Yeah, I think I remember now, and it's probably not a good, but anyway, the place it was painted was odd. But anyway, look busy, Jesus is coming, because scurry around, But it should probably look something like this. Rest in God. Be satisfied in Him. Trust in His redemption. Trust in His purposes. This isn't about amping up your own personal faith, growing this amazing faith that will make God heal you because you can respond in faith. There's just this interesting providential cautionary tale here. He's going to do what He's going to do. Do you trust Him? No. Okay, well then get busy. And we just start adding layers and layers to the stuff that he's done until we're rather framed in and rather ruled by rules and not believing in the restorative heart of God for ourselves. This twin love that Jesus sums up everything with, this twin love is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor. What's the greatest commandment? These two. It's two sides of a coin. But let me tell you, if you start your day and end your day looking at life through this frame, the twin love of God and neighbor, you'll live a restored life and a restoring life. You don't need a lot of rules if you're going to do that. Can you think of a rule that's been but that doesn't cover this? Like, well, it probably does. Are you pouring out your heart to God in adoration, and are you loving that person just like you love yourself? Are you pouring? Well, then go do that. There's a sense, and scholars and church fathers have said it throughout the years. You just basically get that one down, and then do whatever you want. Because if that's what you want, it's going to be awesome. If you just want your life to pour out in love and adoration for God and a restorative heart to love others as you would love yourself, like just, that. Yeah, but how much? And all of it, all the time, just do that. And you will live in the rest of God. So the question is, will you enter into it personally? Will you enter into his rest? Will you enter into his Sabbath? Or will you keep him at bay in the midst of that? I want to read a long quote. I'm not the best at resting. I was teasing with various people in my staff and other places going, this is very odd that I get to preach on Sabbath from the guy who always likes to at least look busy. Sad. But again, self-revelatory mood. But think about this. Every time we sleep, we place ourselves again in this position of vulnerability, of defenselessness, and of dependency. This book is so helpful. I read it again this week just to get myself fresh on this. We enter again this infant-like unguardedness. And we do this well only under one of two conditions: utter exhaustion, where we can't help ourselves, or complete confidence, where we stop trying to help ourselves. And then we sleep, because we know from whence our help comes. Some of you don't sleep, do you? You don't sleep well. There's reasons. And some of them are under your control, some of them aren't. But some of us don't rest like that because there's just too much to do. We sleep because we know in whom we have believed and are confident that he is able to keep that which we have entrusted to him. We give ourselves, regardless of our unfinished business, into God's care. We sleep simply because we believe God will look after us. And it's the same with Sabbath rest. Real Sabbath, the kind that empties and fills us, depends on the second condition, on complete confidence and trust. And confidence and trust like that are rooted in the deep conviction that God is good and that God is sovereign. There is no rest for those who don't believe that. If God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called to his purposes, you can relax. If he doesn't work all things for the good, then start worrying. If God can take any mess, any mishap, any wastage, any wreckage, failure in your own lives, that decision you just made, anything, and choreograph beauty and meaning from it, then you can take a day off. If he can't, get busy. Either God's always at work, watching the city, building the house, or you need to try harder. Some of you are raising families at a frenetic pace. Some of you are working for an employer who seems like a pharaoh, and you forgot you've been liberated. Some of you carry the world's anxieties, and you need to set them at the feet of a God who is a restorer and who heals just for no real reason, it seems, just because he cares about the one who needs the cure, and he desires that for you. So enter into that rest. And it's not justification. I need a break. No, you need God, and you need his restorative heart for you. And so a rest in God is a rest with God and with Jesus. It's how you enter into who he is. And I fail at this often. I need a break, so I switch to something else other than him. And then I go, man, I'm tired of my break. Now that vacation wore me out. Okay, take a Sabbath. The rest of God, with God, to engage God. Let me add one more very interesting claim. Afterward, they found him. Jesus found him in the temple, and he said, "Sin no more, believe." The man went away and told the Jews, and so the Jews were persecuting Jesus because of the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." The Jews had a perspective on God as Father, but the most they would ever claim is our Father, the Father of the nation. He calls him my Father. Oh, you can see what they took from it. He's claiming equality with God. My Father is working until now. There's a sense that God worked 6 days and then he rested as a pattern for us to follow that. But it's also about liberation. And the Father is still working. And if the Father is still working, then we can take a break. But Jesus in this even claims that he is working and the Father is working. And if God wasn't working, if he was not actively holding the molecules together, keeping things in motion, then it would be done. And so today we just proclaim our trust in the providence of God, that he is able to keep things moving. So I just encourage you, just for a next step, pick something from this list or make your own, but take a step toward Sabbath, toward actual rest in God. This doesn't have to be a rule. We've gone way far away from Sunday as a day off to just restore, For many of you, Sunday is a day to catch up and get busy and get working. And I'm not going to put a rule on you or try to impress you with any particular pattern, but take a step toward Sabbath. What would it look like for you, for your family, to rest a little, but also rest with God? Talk about the different rules you've got with a trusted friend. Obviously, our connection groups are meant to be able to process these things and to think through them. And so plug in to those, and maybe over lunch and maybe with a trusted friend. Just talk about it. Are your rules keeping you from a relationship? If not, why not? And if so, how so? And just have a conversation. And especially, we've got to understand that if we're in Christ, that everything that we could ever do to please God has been done in Christ. And so you breathe a little. And you don't try to perform for him. You don't jump through hoops. And you don't just follow the rules. You lay your performance at his feet and say, that's why you're needed, isn't it? That's why you came, isn't it? You can sympathize with my weakness, and here I am again thinking I can earn your favor. But after all this, you've done it all, right? There's some things I'd love for you to think about even as we go to a time of communion, because that's our expression of need. We need something outside of us to make a covenant with God, and it's his performance. Well done, good and faithful servant. Jesus, you've passed the test. That's what we rely on. And so let's do that. Let's rely on him. And if you have questions about this, or you're just, but that doesn't seem to fit my situation, then let us know. We'd be glad to walk with you through that, because that is difficult. It's a difficult journey, a tension we're going to be in for quite a while. But he loves you. Take a step toward Jesus today. He absolutely loves you. And we want to walk with you through that. Let's pray as we prepare for communion. Jesus, it is amazing to watch and listen to you work through all these confounding questions, these people who don't believe you, and yet you still work with them to show them the truth. So we just want to be those kinds of people as followers called by your name that respond to you. Maybe today's the day we need to take a deep breath and find you again, even though you're not far from us. So today, as we engage the elements of communion, would you just show us your posture toward us, show us your disposition. We love you, Jesus.